Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and best practices from the real estate development industry. My name is Payam Nursalihi. I'm the president of Solnik Construction Group, where we help GTA developers plan, build, and deliver successful mid-rise and multiplex projects with fewer surprises. I don't have any guests for this episode. This episode, I want to do a deep dive into some recent announcement by City of Toronto in terms of their incentives for housing, affordable housing, some more details about their incentive about reduction of the development charges. And this all happened about a week ago, and I want to deep into this announcement and try and figure out what does this mean for our industry, what impacts can we anticipate, and learn more about this $1.5 billion worth of money that is supposed to be spent in our city. If that's interesting for you, please stick around and we'll dive into it even more. As always, you can find all the relevant information and links on our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. And please remember to subscribe to the show, and even better, tell others about it and help us grow the show together. Thank you and enjoy listening. So last week, City of Toronto staff held a session during one of the ULI breakfast sessions where they announced more details about some of their upcoming programs, mainly around the recent agreement that has been made about getting additional funding to help with the development charge reductions in City of Toronto and some incentives for the affordable housing. There are some interesting ideas in this report and what they've announced, what the implications might be. Kudos to ULI and their team in Toronto that put together this event, and kudos to our city staff who I have to admit, it was a great session. They had a lot of good news. And as I was talking to Jack Sharma on the side, he mentioned that they've already pulled all the stops that at this point they can to try and help with the feasibility of some of these projects. Just to give a 10,000 feet picture of the event, like around March 30th, we heard a whole bunch of news announcements about Canada and Ontario partnership to build more houses, help with affordable housing, do some development charge reductions. And on June 23rd, they announced $1.5 billion worth of funding to come to Toronto. My take of the whole thing, yes, the headline for the news is that there will be a 60% reduction in development charges, or up to 60% reduction in the development charges, and it will probably help with the feasibility of the project. This announcement revolves around three pillars. One is the DC relief. There are some waivers and some property tax discounts which you can qualify for through the program. There are two main sections. One applies to every single residential project in the City of Toronto, and the second section has to do with affordable housing projects. So this $1.5 billion DCRP, or Development Charge Reduction Program, is going to be replacing what the DCs used to fund or what they were supposed to be used for. And if you've listened to our previous episodes, one of the biggest uses for DCs in the City of Toronto has been around transit, has been around road networks, and a lot of infrastructure that has to do with movement. And no surprise there. Here's the same thing again. So out of the $1.5 billion, $661 million, or about 44% of that, is dedicated toward expanding the road networks. No surprise there. There's another 34%, or $511 million, which is dedicated to enhance the traffic capacity in the City of Toronto. And interestingly enough, only 22% of this fund has been allocated for the water and wastewater infrastructure. To be clear, these are not new projects. There's a whole discussion about how you qualify for this project or how city qualifies for these projects. But bottom line is that these are not new projects. We're filling a hole that is going to be created by these DC reductions, by this additional funding. The question about why about 80 or 78% of all these DC allocations have to do with road networks and transit capacity, I think it's a question that's worth pondering a little bit more. And what are we doing that it eats so much of this allocation in particular? I think the most relevant part of this conversation was about the DC rate reductions. The details are quite interesting, I have to admit. I think just to put things into perspective, there's the period of this application. they are backdating it to March 30th, 2026. So right now, as we're recording this, or when they had the session was end of July, and but they're backdating it to March 30th, when the program was first announced, and it will cover around a 40-month period. And that starts from the time when the actual agreement is signed, it's actually, interestingly enough, it's not signed yet. We hear that's around August 15th that this agreement will be signed and finalized. And on a side note, I do apologize. I'm dealing with a hard cold, and you might hear it in my voice if you haven't noticed it already. As they indicated in the session, this whole DC charge reduction was or is aimed mainly toward mixed income developments and also family-sized units. And you can very, very clearly see that in the chart, which I'm going to go through the chart because there's some very interesting points in the chart. And the other thing that I think is equally important and should not be overlooked is the fact that for the first time in a very long time, about a decade, the DC charge indexing, or the increase that was happening every year as per the inflation rates were going up, it's now frozen. So for the next 3 years and a bit, the rates are not going to go up. This is going to be frozen until 2029, and then we'll see what happens. There's a whole discussion about how this 40-month period will affect the cliff after, because all of a sudden, if you don't have anything to transition into, you're going to have a situation where everyone's rushing toward the very end to meet this criteria and use these discounted rates, and then all of a sudden there's another jump in the rates, which will cause its own problem. So there's discussion about how to deal with that. But now let's go into the rates themselves, because I think there are some very interesting observations to be had from the actual chart. And this is on their website. I'll provide the address in the show notes. You can go download this, a free document that they've provided. Something that is interesting to me, and I think this is probably the first time that's happening, is that the way these 40% or 60% discounts are applied, and on the chart I actually don't see anything in between, so it's either 40% discount or 60% discount. For the first time, I think, they're making 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom plus apartment cheaper from the DC perspective from a single bedroom or studio rental apartment on the rental side. On the rental side, you will be paying a little bit more than $20,000 in DCs for a studio or 1-bedroom apartment. But in the same category, if you look at a 2-bedroom or a 3+ bedroom, you're in the $18,000, $19,000, which is about 10% less than that. And it's actually interesting. It's a good incentive. It wasn't like that before. The larger units always had the bigger share when it came to the DCs. And this is the first time that it's actually reversed, at least in this particular case. Obviously, when you go from a rental project to a non-rental project, the DCs were always higher to begin with. So when you apply those, say, 40 or 60% discounts, the absolute numbers are going to be larger in terms of the actual dollar value. I would say the bigger one, or the largest one that you can see, has to do with the singles and the semis, which previously you would be paying $137,000, almost $138,000 per unit for development charge. And that number has drastically dropped by a 60% discount, obviously, and it's now around $55,000, and that's $82,000 of reductions, or almost $83,000 of reductions on discounts. How effective will it be in incentivizing people to buy land and build and develop singles and semis in the city of Toronto? That remains to be seen. That's not a very practical product these days, and quite honestly, if someone's doing a semi or a single in the city of Toronto, they probably are not going to be hindered by that $80,000 difference. But nevertheless, it's a huge number. It's a good reduction. I think where it becomes more of a player is when you look at the multiplexes and the apartments. So for a multiplex unit for 2+ bedrooms, you're getting the $68,000 benefit and reduction in the DCs. That's a pretty large number for a multiplex project. The multiplex projects these days, 4 units, 5 units, 6 units, 7 units, these are marking around $2 million of construction costs. So 1.7, like 2.5, average listed around $2 million worth of construction costs. And $68,000 per unit, that can add up to a very significant chunk. And maybe, hopefully, it will open up that locked section that we had between the 6th unit up all the way up to the 10th unit, because right now, if you have a part of property in the city of Toronto that you could hypothetically go and build up to 10 units without having to go through site plan, even if the site allows you, the DCs become a factor, and many people are just not doing that, and they're scaling it back, building it to six units, maybe 6+1s, in order to minimize that effect on their pro forma. But maybe this is just enough to make it work and reach the tipping point, and now you would start seeing more projects on 8 or 9 or 10 units, which will actually translate into apartment buildings at that point, and there will not be multiplexes, which is the next point. On an apartment building, you will see $48,000 on the bigger units. So if it's 2+ bedrooms, $48,000 in reductions. Again, for a unit of that size or for a project of that size, these numbers could be very meaningful. One observation here is that multiplexes carry a premium over apartment rentals, regardless. Like, the rates are higher. And if I were trying to read between the lines and think what will it mean in real life in terms of the actual implications, it almost feels like, let's stick to where you have the exemption, which is currently 6 in terms of development charges, and do the smaller multiplexes because they do make sense. And then the minute you go up, it's probably better if you go for a larger number of units, not larger units necessarily. That would be also good, but more units. And again, you have to be mindful of your site capacity. You have to be mindful of the SPA triggers. And quite frankly, the minute you pass the SPA trigger, it's probably best if you push as much as you can. 10 will be very hard to make work. That being said, I'm very curious to see how this will play out. I haven't really seen projects that were penciling north of 6 or 6+1s at 8 or 9 or 10 units. I haven't really seen that many of them. I'm very interested to see if this changes could help that section. Not necessarily sure how this will land, but that would be a question I'll be watching out for. And like I mentioned before, the intent for this program is to push for larger units, family-size units. One point that I would like to make outside of this report, and just based on personal experience and looking at some of these projects, is that, yes, larger units are good. It's great to have 3-bedroom units, but please, before proceeding, put yourself in the shoes of that renter or person who's going to live in that unit. If you're a family and you have a 3-bedroom unit, you need lockers, you need storage, you probably have to have a space for your strollers. You probably have some sort of a transport vehicle for a period of the year. So allow for that in your multiplexes. Unfortunately, we're seeing and hearing about projects that these units are coming to market, especially on the multiplex side, and they're not really collecting the rents they thought they would because the unit itself is a good unit, but does not come with the complementary pieces, which in some instances can be deal breakers. That's another thing. In terms of the actual process, so the good news is that there's no actual process required or application required for you to be eligible to benefit from these DC charges. If you fall within this window of opportunity, the golden window, you will be automatically qualified to use these DC charges. The first building permit needs to be issued between March 30th, 2026 and August 2029. Okay, there are a couple caveats here, and I think it's an important caveat. They're backdating it, so if you've already pulled the permit after March 30th, you could still qualify for it. If you did it before that, obviously they had to introduce a cutoff point there, and you had it probably early in February or something, you will not, unfortunately, qualify for this. But I think the bigger distinction here is the building permit definition, because the way they're defining it is that building permit means, and I'm going to read this off the text here, means any permit to construct a building or structure pursuant to Section 8 of the Building Code Act 1992. What that means is that, and I know a lot of you who are listening to us and have worked in the City of Toronto know about conditional permits, know about partial permits, below-grade permits. So if you've pulled a permit that had to do with your demolition, if you pulled a permit that it had to do with your site servicing, with your cleanup, environmental effects, shoring, excavation that was done for the purpose of environmental cleanup, and you had to sit on a site for 6 months or 12 months, whatever your testing period was, that does not count. You need to have a permit that is pulled for the intention of construction. So if you're pulling a shoring permit, a construction or excavation permit, it needs to be followed, or it needs to be intended for construction of your below grade or foundations or whatever. It needs to be a building permit, not a demo permit or nothing like that. And the second requirement that you're required to meet here is that the above grade permit needs to be issued by August of 2029 or within 24 months of the first building permit. So you can read the requirements. There's the text there that explains that there are 4 different examples that they've given in the report of who would and how they would qualify in terms of timelines. But my simple take on it and the overarching objective, I would argue, is that they're looking for projects that will.
We'll be right back. We'll be right back.
A few months ago, we asked our subscribers 2 questions about their potential multiplex projects in Toronto. What is the single biggest hurdle you're facing, and where do you need the most clarity on? The answers kept coming back to the same concerns: making the projects pencil, having confidence in the assumptions, understanding hidden costs and risks, and knowing whether to move forward or just walking away. That's why we created a Toronto Multiplex Feasibility Workshop. Across 2 live working sessions, we'll build a typical Toronto Multiplex pro forma step by step, covering land, construction costs, rents, financing, and equity, and then challenge those assumptions to see what happens when the numbers don't go according to plan. The goal of this workshop is not to make every project look feasible. It's to give you a clear, more defensible, go-no-go framework before you commit significant time and capital to a potential project. Join us live on August 20th and 27th. Visit multiplexinvesting.com, multiplexinvesting.com for more details. Thank you. A few months ago, we asked our subscribers 2 questions about their potential multiplex projects in Toronto. What is the single biggest hurdle you're facing, and where do you need the most clarity on? The answers kept coming back to the same concerns: making the projects pencil, having confidence in the assumptions, understanding hidden costs and risks, and knowing whether to move forward or just walking away. That's why we created a Toronto Multiplex Feasibility Workshop. Across 2 live working sessions, we'll build a typical Toronto Multiplex pro forma step by step, covering land, construction costs, rents, financing, and equity, and then challenge those assumptions to see what happens when the numbers don't go according to plan. The goal of this workshop is not to make every project look feasible. It's to give you a clear, more defensible, go-no-go framework before you commit significant time and capital to a potential project. Join us live on August 20th and 27th. Visit multiplexinvesting.com, multiplexinvesting.com for more details. Thank you.
Happen exactly in the next 2-3 years. They will make an impact in the city of Toronto, and they will actually bring supply to this strained market. If you're working on a project that's multi-phase, that's going to be a little bit more complicated. You might have to apply separately for the phases. I don't want to comment on that. There's some notes in the report that you can read for yourself. But at the end of the day, they don't want you to start something, but not be able to go through with it and just lock the DCs up front. And the other thing is, the third requirement on that sheet is that the above grade permits cannot be revoked prior to occupancy. So you cannot go ahead, pull a permit, or lock your DCs or get the discounts, and then for whatever reason that permit gets revoked. So those are the 3 guidelines. Other than that, there are no caps. Beautiful. There are no limits. There's no priority list. There's no queue or lineup. If you apply within this period, meet this criteria, you're going to be automatically qualified for that. And as I mentioned, there are examples that you can see in this report of different types of projects with different lengths, with different starting points and finish points, which I suggest you go to their website, to the city website, which will provide the address for, and take a look at. Bottom line on this first part of this announcement was that, so this is a short-term program to help with some supply availability in the City of Toronto in terms of DC reductions. Lauren Burge from City of Toronto, she's the Director of Financial Strategy and Policy at City of Toronto. She made it very clear that they're going through anything and everything that is included in the DC calculation, the way it's done, the way it's weighted, all the formulas, and there will be a DC reform coming up. Meanwhile, and like I mentioned before, there will be a plan to transition off of this golden period or off of this 40-month period to prevent a shock to the market again in 2029. So that's good to know. And I know Jack Sharma also commented on the fact that the SBA process, and we've heard this through different channels, different versions of it, and I'm hoping that there will be an official announcement on that soon enough as well. that the SBA process itself is going through significant overhaul, and they're going to improve it, and hopefully it will get much faster. My understanding is that it will be a lighter version of an SBA, if you may, for a segment of market that would help streamline some of these smaller projects. All of this being said, it needs to still be signed and approved on August 15th. So hopefully that goes through and all is good. So for more information on the DC part, you can go to toronto.ca/DC review to get more information. The second part of this announcement, which I think it's also very important, and it has some key nuggets in it, it had to do with affordable housing initiatives that the City of Toronto is announcing. The City of Toronto had this initiative. There was phase one of the purpose-built rental housing incentive program that was done. And now this is the phase two is being launched in parallel with the DC changes and revisions. I would argue that the DC revisions and changes will affect the viability of the project. They will deal with the supply side and making sure that the project can move ahead. If you run the numbers, if you average them out, if you compare the DC reductions with the average price of a new build unit in City of Toronto, the DC reductions are giving developers 5 to 8% breathing room. How much of that will be translating to the end user pricing? It remains to be seen. My guess is not too much of it, maybe a couple percent will be translated into final price for the consumers. But the second part of this initiative, which has to do with the rental housing, directly targets the affordability side of it, which is good. I have to admit, the numbers are not groundbreaking, but they're not something small that you want to not pay attention to. So they presented some numbers from phase one of this. Phase one had 8,000 rental homes covered, and 2,000 of those were affordable rental units. And City had invested $654 million into these projects through different initiatives. A couple of interesting things that popped out to me is that the overall target, they actually succeeded. The target was 20% affordable housing units. Somehow they managed to get 24. I'm interested on how that happened. I would like to learn more, because if you've ever done this exercise, it's really actually hard to make the 20% affordable work with the current market conditions and the rates that they require you to meet. The second thing that pops out to me, and it's really interesting, is that these 8,000 units, according to the document, is approved for incentives in 16 sites. So 8,000 units, incentives were 16 sites. If you do the rough math is that each of these sites probably had on average around 500 units, if I'm understanding this correctly. 500 units, 20% affordable. So 500 unit project, 100 affordable units. And this gives you a hint on the type of project or the scale of project that they're looking for and can potentially make numbers work on a bigger scale. It seems like the projects are more able to absorb that 20% affordable and make it work. On phase two, the initiative from the city is aimed to support 10,000 new rental homes in the City of Toronto. And out of that 10,000, they still are looking for 2,000 units to be affordable with the definitions of the rates that are in the table. They're not extremely low, the rent rates that they're proposing to collect, but they're definitely not the rent in the market. The gap, I would say, has shrunk a little bit over the past couple of years, considering that the market rate for the rents have dropped a bit. Now the gap is lower, presumably, but still, nevertheless, it's considered affordable, and it will make it harder to make work. They're looking for projects that are large by the looks of it. And I believe that it was even discussed at the event itself. And I think it was Matt Hildert, who is the acting director of housing policy and strategy at City of Toronto, who mentioned that they are looking for bigger projects, and these are in hundreds of units then that would qualify. Again, the push is to make sure the projects will happen very shortly. They're real projects. They're not going to sit on the shelf somewhere. They must have approved zoning in place and an active site plan application. This is the biggest criteria, I would say. So if you are just starting thinking about a project, this is not yours. If you have a project that you've been working on for years, and these are bigger projects, you will benefit potentially from this criteria if you can meet it. So you have to have your zoning, site plan application needs to be active. You need to be able to demonstrate a realistic path to get into construction within 12 months of the application. As far as I understand, right now the application opens on August 15. It will be open for 4 weeks, and presumably somewhere between August 15 and September 15, that 12-month clock will start ticking, and they want you to prove that you can start actually construction in a year. On top of that, you will get priority treatment if you can obviously provide the 20% affordable units, but also have community benefits, have gyms, daycares, anything that adds to the community that you're working at. To wrap up, the way they're going to prioritize these projects, because again, this is not the first one. The first one with the DC reductions all across the board, no caps, no limits. You go there, you meet the timeline, you get a discount. This one, you need to qualify. There will be prioritization happening, and there will be a queue there. And these projects need to unlock additional community infrastructure, facilities, services, including recreation, childcare, parks, and community space. And they need to be transit-oriented and exist near existing modes of public transit. These are very big tickets that can help your project move forward. And you can learn more about this section by going to toronto.ca rental/rental supply, toronto.ca/rental supply. And so you can get more information about this program. I have to admit, these are all good moves. These are all good intentions. These are all good programs that we embrace from City of Toronto. I was very impressed, and there were a lot of bigger players in the room when this announcement was made, and the reaction was positive, especially the DC part, which applies to all projects. I'm thinking it will move the needle on a certain spectrum of projects. I'm not necessarily sure. I haven't really dug into the numbers to see where it will make the most impact, but that's probably something that we'll do in a future episode. And all of this helps. Thank you to the city staff. Thank you for ULI for putting together that great event. And thank you for sticking around and listening to this episode. If you like these types of episodes to have more updates about the market and hear what's going on, what's working, what's not working outside of our regular interviews, please leave us a comment and let us know what you want to hear about. And we're happy to do this more often. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed listening.
Thank you for listening to Real Estate Development Insights podcast. For more practical conversations, articles, project guides, and resources on real estate development, financing, design approvals, and construction, please visit our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. And while you're there, please remember to subscribe to our free newsletter so you get updates about upcoming events, webinars, and podcast episodes. If you find this episode useful, please consider sharing it with someone who works in the real estate development or are interested in learning more about it. Thank you.